Hello everyone, Happy New Year. I'm a little bit late. I found the beginning of the year to be a little bit sluggish, and for me to get the pace back again has been a little bit difficult. But today I'm starting a brand new sketchbook for 2021 and my aim is to have finished it by the end of the year, and I'm really excited. The sketchbook I'm using is one that I bought before Christmas with a plan to start it for this year, and it's made by Etchr. It's from their signature series and it's made with cold press 100% cotton paper made by Fabriano. There are a couple of things I really like about this book. The paper's nice and white, it's got beautiful deckled edges, and you know that I don't like using anything other than 100% cotton paper. It's always a major selling point for me. But this book is also vegan, which is really interesting. So there are no animal products or animal byproducts used in the sizing of the paper or the cover or the binding, none of that stuff. So it's entirely cruelty-free. Now, you know I love my Arches paper, so I wanted to put the Fabriano to the test. And Arches, which you can see on the left, has a much more even absorption than the Fabriano. The Fabriano just took a while for the paint to absorb into, and therefore it kind of pulled and left these little swirls of sort of heavier areas of pigment. And there was a little background at the top as well. So I think with Fabriano paper, it's important to note that you probably have to be a bit more mindful about water control than you would with Arches. But there's also something that's not really called out on their website, which is that the edge of the paper that's used to make the book has the Fabriano branding on it. This might be a bit of a given to people that are used to using paper with raw edges, but I've never used paper in that way, so I was not expecting it in the sketchbook. And I don't like it. I'd rather just have plain paper. You can see it when you're painting. The pigment falls into the grooves, but once dry, it's gone. I tried another layer of this Payne's Grey to see if it did show up with stronger paint, but it doesn't. It still dries flat again. So it's not really a big deal, but I would just rather a plain paper, really. And now for the really exciting part, it's what paints I'm going to be using. So when I bought the sketchbook, I also picked up some paints from A Gallo. They're handmade watercolours from Italy, and they're really well made. They're strongly pigmented. I mean, like the slightest dab of a brush brought up so much paint that I kept having to dilute my paint mixtures while I was making this painting. So they're going to last me a really long time. One thing I was surprised about with these paints is that the red was very tomatoey, so it kind of leaned much more towards orange than I'm used to for the warm primary red in a set of 6. But it wasn't a problem. I mixed it with some of the cool red, and I was able to get a really balanced skin tone for this painting. And actually it probably gave me a little bit more control over the difference in hue across the piece. It was quite interesting to be using 4 colours in the base mixture than 3. But I'm going to save much of my thoughts about these paints for another video, because what I really want to talk about is the purpose of this sketchbook and why I'll be using it for this year. I basically want to create a sort of visual diary of experiments throughout 2021, I think. Whether that's what I'm doing now, which is trying to loosen up, and I'll talk about that in a little moment, or whether it's about swatching and trying to find new ways of mixing colours, or whether it's just recording my thoughts visually with some thumbnails or some very loose watercolour sketches. And it sounds crazy that buying a book allows me to do that. I could use paper. I could buy a pad of 20 sheets of paper and experiment that way. But there is something about those moments being captured, they're bound together in pages, and there's kind of no escaping that journey. One thing I definitely want to avoid is trying to make a perfect sketchbook. So you'll see on the left of this painting at points in the video that I swatched the A Gallo paints. I definitely did that on purpose, but almost